Welcome! Today, we're diving into the concept of inflation, a term you might hear often in the news or in discussions about the economy. But what does it really mean? Inflation is a key economic indicator that affects everyone, from individuals to businesses and governments. Understanding inflation is crucial because it influences the prices of goods and services, the value of money, and even your purchasing power. In this video, we'll break down what inflation is, why it happens, and how it impacts your daily life. Let's start by exploring the basic definition of inflation and why it matters. Inflation is the general increase in prices of goods and services over time. When inflation occurs, each unit of currency buys fewer goods and services than before. This means that the purchasing power of money decreases. For example, if a loaf of bread cost $1 last year and now costs $1.10, that's a sign of inflation. Economists measure inflation by tracking the average price changes of a basket of commonly purchased items. This helps them understand how much prices are rising and how quickly the value of money is changing. To measure inflation, economists use something called a basket of goods. This basket includes a variety of products and services that people commonly buy, such as food, clothing, housing, transportation, and healthcare. By tracking the prices of these items over time, they can calculate how much the overall cost of living is changing. This method provides a clear picture of how inflation is affecting everyday expenses and helps policymakers make informed decisions about the economy. Inflation can occur for several reasons. One major cause is increased demand for goods and services. When more people want to buy products than there are products available, prices tend to rise. Another cause is higher production costs, such as when wages or raw material prices go up. Sometimes, inflation is also influenced by government policies, like printing more money or changing interest rates. Understanding these causes helps us see why inflation is a natural part of most economies. One common type of inflation is called demand pull inflation. This happens when the demand for goods and services exceeds the available supply. Imagine a popular new gadget that everyone wants to buy. If stores can't keep up with the demand, they might raise prices. This type of inflation is often seen during periods of economic growth, when people have more money to spend and are eager to buy more products. Another type of inflation is cost push inflation. This occurs when the costs of production go up, forcing businesses to raise their prices. For example, if the price of oil increases, transportation and manufacturing become more expensive. Companies then pass these higher costs on to consumers in the form of price increases. Cost push inflation can be triggered by rising wages, increased taxes, or shortages of important materials. Built-in inflation is a cycle that happens when workers expect prices to rise, so they demand higher wages. Businesses, in turn, raise their prices to cover these higher wage costs. This creates a feedback loop where wages and prices keep pushing each other higher. Built-in inflation is often influenced by people's expectations and can be difficult to break once it starts. One of the most common ways to measure inflation is the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. The CPI tracks the average change in prices paid by consumers for a basket of goods and services. By comparing the CPI from one year to the next, economists can see how much prices have increased and calculate the inflation rate. The CPI is widely used by governments, businesses, and individuals to understand how inflation is affecting the economy. Besides the CPI, there are other ways to measure inflation. The Producer Price Index, PPI, looks at the prices businesses pay for raw materials and goods before they reach consumers. The GDP deflator is another measure that reflects the prices of all goods and services produced in an economy. Each of these measures provides a different perspective on how prices are changing and helps economists get a fuller picture of inflation. The inflation rate is the percentage change in the price level of goods and services over a specific period, usually a year. For example, if the CPI increases by 2% from one year to the next, the inflation rate is 2%. This rate helps people understand how quickly prices are rising and how much their money's value is changing. A moderate inflation rate is considered normal in a healthy economy. One of the most noticeable effects of inflation is its impact on purchasing power. As prices rise, the same amount of money buys fewer goods and services. This means your paycheck doesn't stretch as far as it used to. For example, if your salary stays the same but prices go up, you might have to cut back on spending or change your shopping habits. Understanding this effect is key to managing your finances during periods of inflation. Inflation doesn't affect everyone equally. Some people and businesses can benefit, while others may struggle. For example, borrowers with fixed-rate loans might find it easier to repay their debts because the real value of what they owe decreases. On the other hand, savers may see the value of their savings erode if interest rates don't keep up with inflation. Understanding who wins and loses helps explain why inflation is such a hot topic. Hyperinflation is an extreme form of inflation where prices rise rapidly and uncontrollably. This can happen when a country prints too much money or loses control of its economy. In cases of hyperinflation, money can lose its value almost overnight, making it difficult for people to buy even basic necessities. Historical examples include Zimbabwe in the 2000s and Germany in the 1920s. Hyperinflation is rare, but can have devastating effects on society. Deflation is the opposite of inflation. It occurs when the general price level of goods and services falls over time. While falling prices might sound good, deflation can actually be harmful to the economy. It can lead to lower profits for businesses, job losses, and reduced consumer spending. Understanding both inflation and deflation helps us see the balance needed for a healthy economy. Stagflation is a rare and troubling economic situation where inflation is high, but economic growth is slow and unemployment is also high. This combination makes it difficult for policymakers to find solutions, since actions to reduce inflation might worsen unemployment and vice versa. Stagflation was most famously seen in the 1970s in the United States, and it remains a challenge for economists to address. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the United States, play a key role in managing inflation. They use tools such as interest rates and money supply controls to keep inflation within a target range. By raising interest rates, central banks can slow down borrowing and spending, which helps reduce inflation. Conversely, lowering rates can stimulate the economy if inflation is too low. Interest rates and inflation are closely linked. When inflation rises, central banks may increase interest rates to make borrowing more expensive and slow down spending. This helps cool off the economy and bring inflation under control. On the other hand, if inflation's too low, lowering interest rates can encourage borrowing and investment, boosting economic activity. Many central banks use a policy called inflation targeting. This means they set a specific inflation rate, often around 2%, as their goal. By aiming for a steady, predictable rate of inflation, central banks help create a stable economic environment. This stability encourages investment, spending, and long-term planning by businesses and consumers. Inflation can have a big impact on wages. If prices rise but wages stay the same, workers may find it harder to afford everyday items. On the other hand, if wages increase along with inflation, people can maintain their standard of living. Employers and employees often negotiate wage increases to keep up with rising prices, especially in times of high inflation. Inflation can erode the value of savings over time. If the interest earned on savings is less than the inflation rate, the real value of your money decreases. This is why it's important for savers to look for investment options that offer returns above the rate of inflation. Understanding this relationship helps people make better financial decisions for the future. Investors pay close attention to inflation because it affects the real returns on their investments. Stocks, real estate, and commodities often perform better during periods of moderate inflation, while bonds can lose value if inflation rises unexpectedly. Diversifying investments and understanding inflation risks are key strategies for protecting wealth. Inflation can make it easier for borrowers to repay fixed-rate debts. As prices and wages rise, the real value of the money owed decreases. This benefits people with mortgages, student loans, or other fixed debts. However, lenders may lose out if the interest they receive doesn't keep up with inflation. Governments are affected by inflation in many ways. Higher inflation can increase tax revenues as prices and incomes rise, but it can also raise the cost of government programs and services. Managing inflation is a key part of economic policy, and governments often work closely with central banks to keep inflation under control. Businesses must adapt to inflation by managing costs and adjusting prices. If they can't pass higher costs on to customers, their profits may shrink. On the other hand, some businesses can benefit from inflation if they own valuable assets or can raise prices faster than their costs increase. Understanding inflation helps businesses plan for the future and stay competitive. Inflation is not just a local issue, it's a global phenomenon. Different countries experience different inflation rates depending on their economic conditions, government policies, and external factors like oil prices or currency exchange rates. Tracking global inflation trends helps economists and investors understand the interconnectedness of the world economy. Imported inflation happens when the prices of goods and services from other countries rise. For example, if the cost of oil increases globally, countries that import oil will see higher prices for fuel and transportation. Exchange rates also play a role if a country's currency weakens, imported goods become more expensive, contributing to inflation. The value of a country's currency is closely tied to inflation. When inflation is high, a currency may lose value compared to others, making imports more expensive and exports cheaper. Central banks monitor currency values and may intervene to stabilize their currency and control inflation. People's expectations about future inflation can influence actual inflation. If businesses and consumers expect prices to rise, they may act in ways that make inflation more likely, such as demanding higher wages or raising prices in advance. Central banks pay close attention to inflation expectations when setting policy. Real estate is often seen as a hedge against inflation. As prices rise, the value of property and rental income can increase, helping property owners maintain their purchasing power. However, high inflation can also lead to higher interest rates, making mortgages more expensive and potentially slowing down the housing market. Commodities like gold, oil, and agricultural products often rise in price during periods of inflation. Investors may buy commodities to protect their wealth from the eroding effects of inflation. However, commodity prices can be volatile, and not all commodities respond to inflation in the same way. Planning for retirement requires careful consideration of inflation. Over time, rising prices can reduce the purchasing power of retirement savings. It's important to factor in inflation when estimating future expenses and choosing investment options that can help maintain your standard of living in retirement. The cost of living is directly impacted by inflation. As prices for essentials like food, housing, and transportation rise, people may need to adjust their budgets and spending habits. Keeping track of inflation helps individuals and families plan for the future and make informed financial decisions. Education costs are often affected by inflation. Tuition fees, textbooks, and other expenses tend to rise over time, making it more expensive to pursue higher education. Planning ahead and understanding inflation can help students and families prepare for these increasing costs. Healthcare expenses are also influenced by inflation. The cost of medical services, insurance, and prescription drugs often rises faster than general inflation. This can put pressure on household budgets and make it harder for people to afford necessary care. Technology can both drive and offset inflation. On one hand, new technologies can make production more efficient and lower costs, helping to keep prices stable. On the other hand, high demand for the latest gadgets can push prices up. The relationship between technology and inflation is complex and constantly evolving. Food prices are often sensitive to inflation. Factors like weather, transportation costs, and global demand can cause food prices to rise quickly. For many families, increases in food prices are one of the most noticeable effects of inflation, impacting their daily budgets. Transportation costs, such as fuel and vehicle prices, are closely linked to inflation. When oil prices rise, the cost of transportation goes up, which can lead to higher prices for goods and services across the economy. Keeping an eye on transportation costs is important for understanding inflation trends. Energy prices, including electricity and gas, are major contributors to inflation. When energy costs rise, it affects the price of almost everything, from manufacturing to transportation and household bills. Monitoring energy prices is essential for predicting inflation movement. Inflation can have significant social effects. When prices rise faster than incomes, it can increase inequality and put pressure on low-income families. Governments may introduce policies to help those most affected, such as subsidies or social programs. Understanding the social impact of inflation is important for building fair and effective policies. Throughout history, inflation has played a major role in shaping economies and societies. From the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany to the stagflation of the 1970s, understanding past episodes of inflation helps us learn valuable lessons for the future. Economists study these events to develop better policies and avoid repeating mistakes. Recent advances in technology, such as automation and digital currencies, are changing how inflation works. Automation can lower production costs, while digital currencies may introduce new ways to manage money and prices. Keeping up with these trends is important for understanding the future of inflation. Inflation affects many aspects of daily life, from grocery shopping to planning vacations. Being aware of inflation helps you make better choices about spending, saving, and investing. By understanding how inflation works, you can protect your finances and plan for a more secure future. There are several strategies to protect yourself from the effects of inflation. These include investing in assets that tend to rise with inflation, such as stocks, real estate, or commodities. Keeping an eye on interest rates and adjusting your savings and investments can also help. Being proactive and informed is the best way to safeguard your financial well-being. To sum up, inflation is the general rise in prices over time, affecting everything from your daily expenses to the global economy. It can be caused by various factors, measured in different ways, and has wide-ranging effects on individuals, businesses, and governments. Understanding inflation helps you make better financial decisions and prepares you for changes in the economy. As we look to the future, inflation will continue to be an important topic for economists, policymakers, and everyday people. Staying informed about inflation trends and understanding how they affect your life is key to financial success. Thanks for joining us on this journey to understand inflation. Stay curious and keep learning.